I raised my daughter alone, then her birth mom returned, turned her against me, and vanished again. I remember meeting my daughter's egg donor like it was yesterday. It was at a friend's house party. Back then, I was hustling as a delivery driver and taking evening classes. She was a year ahead of me in college. We hooked up that night. It was just one of those things, you know. Neither of us thought it would turn into anything serious, so imagine my surprise when she texted me a month later saying she's pregnant. Initially, the egg donor wasn't planning to keep the baby. I told her straight up that I'd support whatever choice she made. It's her body, her decision. But then her super religious parents got involved. They started preaching about how ending the pregnancy would be a sin. They pushed and pushed until she changed her mind about keeping the baby. But even then she kept saying she didn't want to be a mom. She talked about putting the baby up for adoption after it was born. That idea didn't sit right with me. The thought of my kid growing up with strangers, not knowing their real dad, was unbearable. I talked to my parents about it, and they helped me figure things out. I went back to the egg donor with a proposition. I offered to take full custody after the birth. I told her she wouldn't have to deal with any of the parenting stuff if she didn't want to. She jumped at the chance. It let her avoid the responsibility while keeping her parents happy. That the baby wasn't going to strangers seemed like a win-win for everyone. I know some people might think I was crazy for wanting to raise a kid at my age, especially while working as a delivery driver, but I couldn't just let my child disappear into the system. The egg donor signing away her rights was, honestly, the best outcome, even if she did come back years later to stir up trouble. I mean, what kind of person abandons their kid and then shows up expecting to play mom after all the hard work is done? Not that I'm bitter or anything. The day my daughter was born is etched in my memory forever, holding her for the first time, and nothing can prepare you for that feeling. She was this tiny fragile thing, but she instantly became my whole world. My dad pulled me aside in the hospital that day and said being a father would change everything. He wasn't kidding. I looked at her, and I just knew I'd do anything to give her a good life. The egg donor stuck to our agreement and signed over full custody. Her parents weren't thrilled, but she didn't seem to care. She went straight back to her college life while I was figuring out how to be a dad. Must have been nice to just walk away like that. Not that I'm complaining, it worked out better this way. Honestly, being a single dad while trying to finish my classes was no joke. I was delivering packages during the day, attending evening classes, and learning how to be a parent all at the same time. My parents were a huge help. My mom would watch my daughter during my classes, and they'd take turns when I had delivery routes. I probably wouldn't have made it without them, but I still felt weird about relying on them so heavily. I picked up extra delivery routes whenever I could to help with the bills. Some days I was running on fumes, dragging myself through deliveries after being up all night with a crying baby, but that's what you do when you're a parent. My daughter needed me, and that's all that mattered. I'm pretty sure I consumed more energy drinks the first year than any human should, but we made it work. I was determined to handle everything myself. The diapers, the doctor visits, all of it. My parents kept offering to help more with the expenses, but I was stubborn. Looking back, maybe I should have accepted more help, but I wanted to prove that I could be a good dad. I'm sure plenty of people doubted a young driver could handle being a single father. I was determined to prove them wrong. The egg donor finished college before me and moved away with some guy she was dating. She never once asked how her daughter was doing, not a single text, call, nothing, but that was fine by me. I didn't need her checking, and just to complicate things, my daughter had one parent who actually cared, and that was enough. I kept at my delivery job. After getting my degree, the company treated me well, gave me better routes, and the pay was decent. Switching careers wasn't as easy as it sounds. I was a single parent, and my daughter was still young. The delivery job, as unglamorous as it might seem, offered stability and a predictable schedule. The thought of starting over in a new field, potentially having to work longer or unpredictable hours, was daunting. Plus, I had a good rapport with my boss, and colleagues they understood my situation as a single dad and were always flexible when I needed to adjust my schedule for school events or doctor appointments. Honestly, the devil, you know. Sometimes feels safer than the one you don't, especially when you have a kid depending on you. I figured it was better to stick with something steady that allowed me to prioritize my daughter, even if it meant putting my career ambitions on the back burner. Then I finally saved up enough to get us our own place. It was nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom apartment, but it was ours. My parents offered to keep helping, but they'd already done more than enough. It felt good to finally be standing on my own feet. Those first few months in our new place were tough, trying to manage a set delivery schedule while raising a kid alone isn't exactly something they prepare you for. I had to figure out morning routines, after school care, meal prep, all that parent stuff. My daughter would sometimes come with me on weekend deliveries when I couldn't find a sitter. She'd sit in the passenger seat, helping me sort packages and giving me directions. Those were actually some of my favorite times with her, hearing her laugh at my bad jokes while we drove around town. I guess sometimes the hard times turn into the best memories. People at work thought I was crazy for doing all this alone, but seeing my daughter grow up happy made everything worth it. Kids are naturally curious about their parents. It's just how it is. When my daughter started asking about her birth mother, I didn't try to sugarcoat anything. I told her straight up that the egg donor chose a different life, one that didn't include being a mom. It might not have been the nicest thing to tell a kid, but I wasn't going to make up some fairy tale about her mother being forced away or something. My daughter deserved the truth, even if it stung a little. That honest approach worked for years. By the time she turned 14, we had a really good thing going. She was doing great in school, had a great group of friends, and we were solid, just me and her against the world. We didn't need anyone else. Then right before her 15th birthday, everything went. The egg donor suddenly appeared on Instagram, sliding into my DMs like she hadn't been me for almost 15 years. She said she'd been thinking about our daughter and wanted to meet her, right? Because 15 years of radio silence wasn't enough time to think about that. I wanted to block her right then and there. Something about her message just felt off, like when you get one of those scam texts that seems legit at first, but you know there's trouble coming. I had my reasons for not wanting the egg donor anywhere near my daughter. Back when we met at that house party, she was already mixed up with some questionable people. Everyone knew she partied hard and not just the regular college stuff. Her boyfriends were always into drugs and she'd follow whatever they did. There was no way I was letting someone like that near my kid. I messaged her back on Instagram, trying to keep things civil. I told her my daughter was doing great and that if she wanted to meet her, she'd have to wait until she turned 18, then it would be my daughter's choice. The egg donor left me on read. You know that annoying thing where they see your message but don't respond? I thought that was the end of it. I should have known better. Turns out she went behind my back and found my daughter's Instagram. She started feeding her all these lies about how I was this controlling dad who'd kept them apart, telling her things like your dad never wanted you to have a mom and he is the reason we couldn't be together. My daughter never mentioned any of these messages to me, but I started noticing changes in her behavior. The way she'd barely look at me during dinner, how she stopped telling me about her day after I got home from my roots. Little things that added up to something being wrong. My daughter's behavior changed drastically almost overnight. One day, we're joking around while I sort packages for my next day's route. The next, she's barely speaking to me. She'd slam her bedroom door, roll her eyes when I tried to talk to her, snap at me over the smallest things. This wasn't my kid. She'd always been this sweet girl who'd leave little notes in my lunch bag when I headed out for deliveries. I tried to convince myself it was just normal teenage stuff. You know how kids that age can be, but this felt different. She stopped hanging out in the living room when I was home, wouldn't tell me about school anymore. She started eating dinner in her room instead of with me every Time I tried to talk to her, she'd find some excuse to leave. Then there was this one night that really scared me. She didn't come home after school 2 hours late. No text, nothing. We had this rule: we always let each other know if we're running late. I'd text her if a delivery route was taking longer than usual. She'd message if she was studying at a friend's place, but that day complete silence. I must have sent her 20 messages and calls asking where she was. When she finally came home, she looked terrible. Red eyes, messy hair, just completely drained. I asked her if she was okay, and she just broke down crying right there in our kitchen. That's when she told me everything. The egg donor had found her on Instagram weeks ago. They'd been messaging back and forth, and that day they'd met in person. My daughter was crying about all these things. The egg donor had told her lies about how I'd kept them apart, how I'd stopped her from having a real family, 15 years of being a good dad, and this woman shows up out of nowhere to tear it all down. My daughter told me the egg donor had made her promise not to tell me they were talking, said I'd tried to stop them from having a relationship if I knew they'd met up after school that day, and the egg donor had really done a number on her head. She told her this whole story about how I'd forced her to give up custody, how I'd threatened her until she signed the papers. Really nasty stuff. She made it sound like I'd stolen my daughter away and kept her from having a mom all these years. I wanted to punch a wall. Here's this woman who walked away from our kid without looking back, and now she's painting me as the bad guy. But I couldn't lose it, not with my daughter sitting there crying, believing all these lies. I had to keep it together. I reminded my daughter about what really happened, about how the egg donor made it clear she didn't want to be a mom, how she was ready to give our baby to strangers. Until I stepped up, I told her she could ask my parents about it. They were there for everything. They saw how things really went down. If she wanted to be your mom, she had 15 years to show up. I told her she knew where we lived. She had my number. She chose not to be involved, but my daughter wasn't hearing any of it. The egg donor had gotten to her first, filled her head with all these stories. My kid screamed at me, said it ruined her life by keeping her away from her mother. 15 years of bedtime stories, school runs between delivery shifts, band concerts, homework, help. None of it seemed to matter anymore. That woman had turned my daughter against me. In just a few weeks, I grabbed my daughter's phone that night and called the egg donor. I had to know why she was telling these lies to my kid, but she didn't back down at all. She just started going on about how she was too young to understand when she signed away her rights, and now that she was mature, she deserved to be in my daughter's life. She kept saying things like, "You can't keep my daughter from me anymore." My daughter, really, after 15 years of nothing, suddenly she's claiming parent rights. I tried everything to stop them from meeting. I told the egg donor to back off, reminded her about the custody agreement, even threatened to get lawyers involved. Nothing worked. She kept seeing my daughter behind my back, and my kid just went along with it. Every time I tried to explain things to my daughter, she'd shut down or start defending the egg donor. The egg donor started acting like she owned the place. She wanted to know about my daughter's grades, her friends, her activities, everything. She started showing up at places where she knew we'd be. She even tried joining the parent group chat for my daughter's class. Meanwhile, my sweet kid, who used to help me sort packages and tell me about her day, turned into someone I barely knew. She started talking back, breaking rules, staying out late. The egg donor just encouraged it all, telling her I was too strict. I'd come home from my delivery routes to find my daughter had snuck out again, probably with the egg donor. My texts would go unanswered for hours. When she was home, she'd lock herself in her room or be on her phone, ignoring me completely. I came home from my delivery route one day to find my daughter standing in our kitchen with the egg donor. My kid had these huge tattoos all over her neck, not just one, but several of them running from her jaw down to her collarbone. At 15 years old, my brain just stopped working for a minute. I've got nothing against tattoos. People can do what they want with their bodies, but neck tattoos on my 15-year-old, my daughter, just stood there, like it was no big deal, telling me she'd been wanting tattoos for a while. The egg donor had taken her to some tattoo shop and helped her pick out the designs. I'm pretty sure that's illegal, tattooing a minor without parental consent, but the egg donor probably knew someone who didn't care about checking ID. I lost it. I started yelling about how stupid and dangerous this was. These weren't little hidden tattoos she could cover were up. They were right there on her neck for everyone to see, but my daughter just rolled her eyes at me like I was being dramatic. Then the egg donor had the nerve to pipe up, "You're so controlling." She told me when I was her age I was doing way worse things than getting tattoos, right? Because that makes it okay. This woman walks back into my daughter's life after 15 years and starts making permanent decisions about her body. I wanted to throw them both out of my house. Instead, I had to stand there while this person, who'd never changed a single lead diaper, lectured me about parenting. I ripped into the egg donor, telling her exactly what I thought about her parenting. I told her my daughter needed actual guidance, not some wannabe cool mom encouraging her to make stupid choices, but she just laughed it off, saying my daughter could make her own decisions. Easy for her to say. She hadn't spent 15 years raising this kid. Everything went downhill after that. My daughter started coming home with new facial piercings every week. Then she shaved half her head, then 3/4 of it, leaving these random patches of hair that looked terrible. She started wearing these torn-up clothes to school that barely covered anything. Her teachers kept calling me between my delivery runs, telling me she was breaking dress code and causing disruptions. The kids she started hanging out with were bad news. I'd see them smoking behind the convenience store on my delivery route, skipping school. My daughter's grades tanked. She was failing math, which used to be her best subject. Every time I opened her report card, my stomach dropped lower. I'd come home from work to find notes from school about missed classes. My straight A kid was now getting sent to detention regularly. The egg donor probably thought this was all fine, probably told her rebellion was normal or some garbage like that. Meanwhile, I'm watching my kid throw away her future, and I can't do anything to stop it. I tried everything to get through to her between delivery runs. I'd sit her down to talk, not yelling or lecturing, just trying to understand what was going on in her head. I asked her to see the school counselor, thinking maybe she'd open up to someone else. I called my parents over to talk with her. Nothing. It was like talking to a wall. She'd just stare at her phone or walk away. The egg donor wasn't helping. Every time I tried setting rules or consequences, she'd tell my daughter I was being unfair. She'd encourage her to ignore me, tell her that rules were meant to be broken. Then came her sweet 16. I always made a big deal out of her birthday's decorations, cake, the whole thing, but this year my daughter insisted the egg donor had to come. Said she wouldn't have the party without her mom there. That word felt like a slap in the face, but I gave in. I figured causing a scene would just push my kid further away. Looking back, I should have known it would be a disaster. My daughter showed up to her sweet 16 looking like she'd raided a punk rock dumpster. She wore this shirt that was more holes than fabric, paired with these tiny shorts that were basically just threads. She'd taken scissors to everything, clothes, hair, you name it. Her hair was completely shaved on one side, ran patches left long on the other. The neck tattoos were bad enough, but now she had this huge new one right across her collarbone, thus the F word in fancy letters right where everyone could see it. Add in all the facial piercings, and my kid looked completely different from the sweet girl in last year's birthday photos. My relatives' faces said it all. Most of them hadn't seen her since Christmas, back when she still looked like herself. Now here she was parading around, half dressed with curse words tattooed on her body. My aunt nearly choked on her drink when she saw her. My uncle and us turned around and walked straight out. Can't really blame them. This wasn't exactly what they expected. At a family birthday party, my daughter just kept walking around like she was at some rebel fashion show. Didn't care that her grandparents could barely look at her, or that her little cousins were asking their parents why she had bad words on her neck. I was dying to say something, but what could I do? Make a seen at her birthday party tell her to go change when the egg donor would just back her up. Sometimes you have to pick your battles. This one felt already lost. I caught the egg donor trying to sneak my daughter wine during the party, just pushing the glass at her, telling her one drink wouldn't hurt. I pulled her aside and told her to knock it off, but instead of acting like a normal person, she started screaming about how she was also a parent and I couldn't tell her what to do right, because parents totally give alcohol to 15-year-olds at birthday parties. Then my daughter pipes up, telling me to chill out because she'd already been drinking before. Turns out the egg donor had taken her to some bar. My kid sat there bragging about how she had 4 or 5 glasses of vodka, got completely wasted. I lost it right there. In front of everyone I started yelling at the egg donor, told her she had no right bringing my underage kid to bars, getting her drunk. Real responsible parenting from someone who'd been Mia for 15 years. I wasn't thinking straight anymore. Just told her I'd call the cops, call Child Protective Services, get her arrested for giving alcohol to a minor. Probably not my finest moment yelling about arrests during a birthday party, but hearing my kid talk about getting wasted like it was some achievement just pushed me over the edge. My daughter jumped right in defending the egg donor, said it was all her idea to go drinking, that she'd begged to go to the bar and the egg donor just went along with it. Like that made it better somehow. The egg donor just stood there smirking, telling me I was being possessive and controlling, said if I kept suffocating my daughter like this she'd end up cutting me out of her life completely. I wasn't backing down, told them both that keeping my 15-year-old from drinking wasn't being controlling, it was called being a parent. It's literally what the law expects me to do. But before I could finish, my daughter just exploded, started screaming about how she wasn't a baby anymore, how I needed to stop treating her like one. Then she hit me with something I never thought I'd hear from my own kid. She told me if I reported the egg donor to CPS or the police, she'd lie and say I'd been abusing her. My daughter, the same kid I'd raised alone, the one I'd rearranged my delivery routes for so I could make it to every school event, the one I'd spent 15 years putting first, was standing there threatening to make up abuse stories about me. Now here she was ready to throw me under the bus for someone who'd walked away from her without a second thought. My daughter wasn't done. She went off about how the egg donor was a better parent than me because she was fun and understanding. Said the egg donor let her live her life instead of controlling her like I did. Then she really twisted the knife, called me a terrible father right there in front of everyone, said she wished she could just go live with her real mom. I've delivered packages in blizzards, worked doubles when other drivers called in sick, done everything I could to give my kid a good life. Now here she was telling our whole family I was a horrible dad. My relatives tried jumping in, reminding her about all the times I've been there for her, but my daughter just stood there with this cold look on her face, like she couldn't care less about hurting me. Something changed in me that day watching my daughter choose this woman who'd abandon her, hearing her threaten to lie about abuse, seeing her throw 15 years of love back in my face. It broke something I don't think can be fixed. She never said sorry, not for embarrassing me at her party, not for threatening to lie about me, not for any of it. Just kept acting like I deserved it for trying to be a real parent. After that disaster of a party, I knew something had to change. My kid clearly didn't want me around anymore, so I decided to give her what she wanted, called both of them over, and told them my daughter could go live with the egg donor. I'd keep sending money for her expenses until she turned 18, but otherwise I'd stay out of their way. The egg donor tried hiding her smirk, but I caught it. My daughter just sat there, looking surprised. Guess she didn't expect me to actually let her go, but they both agreed pretty quick. Just like that, my daughter packed up her room and left. The house felt huge without her. Stuff everywhere. Coming home from my delivery routes to an empty house was weird. She'd call sometimes, but I kept it brief. Hard to talk to your kid when you're still raw from them threatening to lie about you abusing them. Then this morning, while I was sorting packages for my route, I got this message from her. saying she regretted moving in with the egg donor. I asked her what happened, but she won't say much. I don't know if I can handle her turning on me again. What if I try to help and she just makes up more lies about me? Update 1. Look, I know people think I messed up letting my kid move out, but being a single dad working delivery routes while trying to raise a kid isn't exactly a walk in the park, especially when you've got the egg donor whispering in your kid's ear, turning every rule into proof that you're controlling, making every attempt to parent sound like abuse. The egg donor knew exactly what she was doing. She played my daughter like a fiddle, getting in her head, making her think I was the bad guy. And here's the thing about teenagers: the harder you try to control them, the more they fight back. If I'd forced my daughter to stay, she probably would have just snuck out, maybe run away. Could have ended up somewhere worse than the egg donor's place. Truth is, I figured my daughter needed to see the egg donor's true colors for herself. Me telling her your mom's bad news wasn't working, it just made me look jealous or controlling. Sometimes kids have to learn the hard way. I wanted my daughter to understand why I spent 15 years trying to protect her from someone who'd walked away without looking back. Guess I'm finding out now if that was the right call or not. Update: I just gotten back from my morning deliveries when my daughter showed up at the door. She looked awful. I got her inside, handed her some water, tried to get her to calm down. Then she told me she couldn't stay with the egg donor anymore, wanted to come home. When she finally started talking, it all came pouring out. Living with the egg donor wasn't the party she'd imagined. The woman would start drinking as soon as she woke up. By the time she hit her 6th or 7th glass of vodka, she'd turned nasty, real nasty. Not the cool mom my daughter thought she was getting. My kid ended up playing house servant, cooking, cleaning, picking up after the egg donor. Everything said she thought helping out would make things better at first, but it just got worse. The egg donor would scream at her if dinner wasn't ready on time, or if the house wasn't clean enough. Started treating my 15-year-old like her personal maid. The money I sent every month, the egg donor spent it all on herself: new clothes, makeup, whatever she wanted. Meanwhile, my daughter couldn't even buy school supplies, just told her school wasn't important. My kids stayed with her for 2 months and got nothing in return. Then my daughter told me about the men the egg donor brought home: different guys every night, random dudes showing up drunk at all hours. My kid said she started sleeping with her dresser pushed against her bedroom door. Number 16-year-old should have to barricade themselves in their room to feel safe. I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner. I could have done something, gotten her out of there. She just stared at her hands for a minute. Then she brought up her sweet 16, how she'd threatened to lie about me being abusive. Said she felt too ashamed to ask for help. After that, my daughter started crying, telling me she'd been stupid to believe the egg donor's lies. Said she regretted everything: the neck tattoos, the attitude turning against me. Just kept asking if she could please come home. Watching her sit there, all that teenage attitude gone. Us, my kid needing her dad again. How could I say no? I hugged her and told her this would always be her home. The relief on her face hit me hard. Hadn't seen her look that peaceful since before the egg donor showed up in our lives. After my daughter left, I messaged the egg donor about meeting up. Got to figure out how to handle this mess. Not sure what I'll say to her. Face kind of hard to keep calm when someone's put your kid through hell. But I've got to do something. No way I'm letting my daughter stay in a place where she doesn't feel safe. Might need to adjust my delivery schedule, make sure I'm home more, but we'll figure it out. We always have. Update 3. It's been crazy these past few weeks. My daughter's back home now, but getting her here wasn't easy. The egg donor went nuts when we started moving my daughter's stuff out. Kept screaming about how I'd turned my daughter against her, how I'd manipulated everything rich coming from someone who'd spent months trying to destroy our relationship. My daughter told her exactly why she was leaving. The egg donor lost it, tried threatening my kid, said if she left, they'd never speak again. Imagine that, abandoning your kid twice. I told the egg donor straight up that my 15-year-old had every right to feel safe, and if she wanted to cut contact over that, it just proved she was never really a mother. The egg donor hasn't tried contacting my daughter since we left. My kid feels pretty rough about everything. She keeps apologizing for the tattoos, the attitude, all of it, but we're working through it. I found this therapist who specializes in teen stuff. My daughter agreed to go. That's huge for her. I've been emailing with her teachers too. They're helping us make a plan to get her grades back up. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. Had to switch some of my routes around to be home more, but my boss was pretty understanding when I explained things, coming home after deliveries and seeing her doing homework at the kitchen table or hearing her laugh at something on TV. Man, I miss that. Our relationship isn't perfect yet, but it's healing.